teenager when he played a role in the killing of Pam Smart's husband, Greg.
On the first day of May 1990, a young man named Gregory Smart came home to his condominium in Derry, New Hampshire. He was 24 years old, married less than a year, and by every account just beginning his adult life. He never made it out of that front hallway alive. He was forced to his knees and shot once in the head. When his wife came home and called for help, the scene looked like a burglary gone wrong, furniture overturned, belongings scattered. But the investigators who walked through that condo noticed something off almost immediately. The chaos didn't add up, and the truth, when it finally came out, would be far stranger and far darker than any break-in. The person who arranged Gregory Smart's death was the one person who should have loved him most, his own wife. And the weapon she used was a teenage boy she had spent months manipulating. This is the story of Gregory Smart, and the murder his wife very nearly got away with. On the surface, Greg and Pamela Smart looked like a young couple with a bright future. Greg was 24, outgoing and well-liked, working in insurance. Pamela was 22, polished and ambitious. She had grown up partly in Florida and partly in New Hampshire, been a cheerleader in high school, earned a college degree in communications, and landed a job as a media services coordinator at a local high school. They had married in 1989. To friends and family, they were an attractive, upwardly mobile pair, the kind of couple whose life seemed to be falling neatly into place. But behind that polished image, the marriage was not what it appeared. Less than a year in, Pamela had grown restless and dissatisfied, and rather than confront the marriage honestly or simply leave it, she made a series of choices that would end with her husband dead and her own life destroyed. Because at the school where she worked, Pamela Smart had set her sights on someone, not a colleague, not another adult, a 15-year-old student. This is the part of the story that has to be understood for exactly what it was, not a romance, but the calculated exploitation of a child by an adult in a position of authority. Pamela Smart was a 22-year-old school employee. William Flynn, known as Billy, was a 15-year-old boy. She had power, status, and an adult's understanding of how to influence a teenager who did not yet have the maturity to see what was being done to him. And she used all of it. She drew the boy into a secret relationship, one built entirely on manipulation, flattery, and control. To Flynn, in his 15-year-old mind, it may have felt like the most important relationship of his life. He would later say he believed he was in love, but the imbalance was total. She was the adult, he was the child, and she steered that imbalance toward one purpose. Because Pamela had a problem she wanted solved. She did not want to be married to Greg anymore, but she also, according to what came out at trial, did not want to simply divorce him. She believed a divorce would cost her, that she could lose the condo, the possessions, the life she had built. There was also her husband's life insurance policy, worth $140,000, a sum that would only come to her if Greg died, not if they divorced. So instead of leaving, she began, slowly and deliberately, to plan a different idea in the mind of the teenage boy she controlled. She told him, prosecutors said, that they could only truly be together if Greg was gone, and she made it brutally clear what she meant. According to Flynn's testimony, she told him she needed her husband killed, and she threatened to end their relationship if he refused to do it. She didn't pull a trigger. She didn't need to. She had found someone she could convince to do it for her. By the spring of 1990, the plan had taken shape, and Flynn had pulled in several of his teenage friends to help carry it out. On the evening of May 1st, while Pamela Smart was conveniently away from the home, the boys went to the Smarts' condominium in Derry. They lay in wait inside. When Greg Smart came home, he walked into an ambush. He was confronted, forced down onto his knees in the hallway, and shot a single time in the head. He died there in his own home at 24 years old. The boys then did what they had been told to do. They staged the scene to look like a burglary. They knocked over furniture, scattered belongings, and tried to make it appear that Greg had surprised intruders who panicked and killed him. Then they left. When Pamela returned and discovered, or appeared to discover, her husband's body, she reported it as exactly what it was designed to look like, a robbery that had turned deadly. In those first days, she played the part of the shattered young widow. She gave interviews. She spoke about her grief. To the watching public, she was a tragic figure, a woman whose new husband had been taken from her by a random act of violence. But the investigators were not convinced. From the very beginning, detectives noticed that the so-called burglary didn't make sense. The staging was wrong in the way that staged scenes so often are. The disorder looked deliberate rather than chaotic. Valuables that a real burglar would have grabbed were left behind. And the central fact of the killing, a single, deliberate gunshot to the head of a man forced to his knees, did not look like the work of a panicked thief interrupted mid-robbery. It looked like an execution. So the police kept the investigation open and kept pulling threads. And as they did, they began to hear things. In a community where teenagers talk, word of what some local boys had done started to spread. Rumors reached investigators that this had not been a stranger's crime at all, that it had been arranged, and that the dead man's own wife was somehow at the center of it. The investigation began to circle Pamela Smart, but suspicion was not proof. To convict her, prosecutors would need something far more powerful than rumor. And they would get it. From a teenage girl, Pamela had made one fatal mistake of trusting. Among the people who knew what had really happened was a teenager named Cecilia Pierce, who had worked with Pamela and been close enough to her to be told the truth. When investigators identified Pierce and approached her, she agreed to cooperate. And what she did next would break the case wide open. Cecilia Pierce agreed to wear a hidden recording device and have conversations with Pamela Smart while police listened. Those secretly recorded conversations were devastating. On tape, away from the cameras and the Grieving Widow performance, Pamela spoke about the murder in a way that was impossible to square with innocence. Prosecutors would argue that her own recorded words showed she had known about the plot all along, that she had orchestrated it, and that she was now scrambling to keep her co-conspirators quiet. She also pressured Pierce, urging her to lie to investigators or to stay silent, behavior that would later become a separate criminal charge of witness tampering. On August 1, 1990, 3 months after Greg Smart was killed, the trap closed. A detective approached Pamela in the parking lot of her school. He told her, in words that have since become infamous, that he had good news and bad news, the good news being that they had solved her husband's murder, the bad news being that she was under arrest for it. She was handcuffed and charged with first-degree murder. The trial of Pamela Smart, which began in March of 1991, became a genuine national sensation, and it changed American media forever. It was one of the first murder trials in the United States to be broadcast on television gavel to gavel, start to finish. People lined up for tickets to get into the courtroom. Those who couldn't get in watched on monitors in overflow rooms. Reporters packed the building. The country was riveted, and the case set the template for the televised trial spectacles that would follow throughout the decade. The prosecution's case rested heavily on 2 pillars. The first was the testimony of the teenage boys themselves. Flynn and his accomplices had all made plea deals, agreeing to cooperate and testify against Pamela in exchange for lesser sentences. From the witness stand, Flynn described how she had manipulated him, how she had told him she needed Greg dead, and how she had threatened to leave him if he didn't go through with it. The second pillar was the secret recordings, Pamela's own voice, contradicting her public story of innocence and reconciliation. Pamela Smart took the stand in her own defense and insisted she had known nothing about any plot. She presented herself as a grieving widow being framed by guilty teenagers trying to save themselves. But against the combined weight of the testimony and the tapes, her denials could not hold. On March 22, 1991, after a trial lasting roughly 2 weeks, the jury found Pamela Smart guilty on all counts, as an accomplice to first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and witness tampering. Under New Hampshire law, the sentence was mandatory and absolute. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. She was 23 years old. One of the most striking and uncomfortable features of this case is how differently it ended for the people involved. Pamela Smart, who never went to the condominium that night and never physically touched a weapon, received the harshest sentence of anyone: life without any hope of release. This is because of a legal principle called accomplice liability, the idea that the person who plans and directs a murder is just as guilty as the person who carries it out. The jury concluded that Pamela was the architect of the entire scheme, and the law treated her accordingly. The teenagers who actually carried out the killing, by contrast, received far lighter outcomes. Because they cooperated and pleaded guilty, they served defined sentences and, one by one, were eventually released back into the world. William Flynn, the boy who fired the fatal shot, served 25 years and walked free in 2015. For decades, Pamela Smart maintained that she had been wrongly convicted, insisting she'd had no part in planning her husband's death and blaming the overwhelming media coverage for tainting her trial. She pursued appeal after appeal and petition after petition, and lost every one of them. New Hampshire's courts and governors repeatedly declined to reduce her sentence. Then in 2024, after nearly 34 years behind bars, something shifted. For the first time, Pamela Smart publicly accepted responsibility for her husband's death. In a recorded statement, she said she had spent years deflecting blame, almost as a coping mechanism, and acknowledged that she was the one to blame for Greg's absence from the world. Even then, members of Greg's family were unmoved, noting that her statement seemed to dance around the actual facts of what she had done, and pointing out that she had not even spoken Greg's name. As of today, her conviction stands, her latest legal challenges continue to be filed, and she remains in prison. In the middle of all of this, it is easy to lose the person at the center, Gregory Smart. He was 24 years old. He had been married for less than a year. He came home one ordinary evening, expecting nothing more than a quiet night, and instead walked into an ambush arranged by the woman who had stood beside him at the altar. Pamela Smart thought she had built the perfect murder, distant enough from her own hands that no one could ever tie it back to her. She used a teenage boy as her weapon, staged a burglary as her cover, and played the grieving widow as her shield. And for 3 months, it almost worked. But perfect murders are a myth. The staged scene was too neat. The boys could not stay silent. And in the end, her own words, captured on a hidden recording, became the thing that buried her. She arranged a death she was sure could never be traced to her. It was traced straight back. This is the story of Gregory Smart. May he rest in peace.